Well, let's get some more analysis now, and we can cross to the outskirts of Kyiv and speak to Peter Zalmayev, who is the director of the Eurasian Democracy Initiative. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Severodonetsk has become one of the bloodiest land battles since the start of the Russian invasion in February. Just tell us why this is such an important battle as far as Kyiv is concerned.
Well, first of all, let me just say that its importance to Russia as it stands is more symbolic rather than strategic. As far as the military campaign goes, it's a city like many others and does not have much significance, apart from the fact that it is the remaining, essentially, 3 to 5% unconquered territory of the Luhansk region that remains in Ukraine's hands. And so, it's, part and parcel of Vladimir Putin's strategy as it stands now is to try to get this territory, to try to, complete the capture of all of Luhansk so that after over 100 days of this ridiculous war, he can sell it to his people as some sort of a victory, with the possible, annexation of this area to the rest of Russia. Right now, it's being debated in the Kremlin whether they will take the Crimea route and just annex it outright, or try to conduct some kind of a fake referendum and maybe proclaim it, an independent state, which actually it already is, according to Russia. They, recognized its independence right before the war. But let me just say one more thing, in summing up, this is a clear indication that politics is currently running the military campaign and giving orders to the military in Ukraine. And by politics, I mean Vladimir Putin. He himself is pretty much calling the shots there and is expending all sorts of forces on trying to capture this city.
Do you think the Russians will stop at the Donbass?
I do not think so. We're already seeing Russians are, occupying a significant portion of the Zaporizhia region, which is adjacent to the Donbas, and then Kherson, which is adjacent to the Crimea. Vladimir Putin's, immediate goal is to try to cut Ukraine off from all access to the sea, which would mean all the way from Kharkiv, and he hasn't given up on Kharkiv yet, all the way through the east, south, and all the way to Odessa to link up to the Russia-occupied part of Moldova, Transnistria, therefore, making Ukraine a landlocked country.
Yeah, you mentioned Kharkiv just there, and Russia did retreat from Kharkiv, having failed to capture Ukraine's second largest city. But today they struck that city again. They killed one person in that strike, injured some others. What's the message they're trying to send to Kharkiv and the rest of Ukraine by leaving but not really leaving?
Well, it's the same message that they're sending elsewhere. For example, in Kyiv, where I'm based, 5 days ago, there was a rocket attack on Kyiv after several weeks of a break, of a lull in shelling. It's a message Vladimir Putin is trying to send elsewhere and throughout Ukraine, which is first of all to show his utter hatred of all things Ukrainian. He has a very personal feeling about Ukraine, which he doesn't recognize as having the right to be independent from Russia. It is also to try to continue terrorizing Ukrainians with this, I think, unrealistic hope of bringing them to their knees and essentially capitulating. I don't see this happening anytime soon.
Something the British Prime Minister said today, the embattled, shall we say, British Prime Minister, who seems to be sticking around for the time being. He said that President Zelensky mustn't be pressured by world powers into accepting a bad peace deal with Russia. What's he talking about here? And is this idea of a bad peace deal something that you think Ukraine risks having forced upon it?
Well, the Ukrainians are perplexed about this phone diplomacy that, with all due respect, but the European leaders have engaged in. I'm talking about Mr. Scholz and Mr. Macron. They have spoken with Vladimir Putin by phone, and then they acknowledged nothing came of it. There is a little bit of a kind of suspicion Ukrainians harbor about the West's intentions. Obviously, it also comes on the heels of Henry Kissinger's speech in Davos, where he point blank said that Ukraine needs to part with its territory to try to make peace with Russia. And obviously, we go back all the way to 2014 and 2015, and the peace that Ukraine was essentially forced to sign with Russia, which led 8 years down the road to this. By being forced to sign a bad peace deal with Russia, the entire European community, Ukraine with everyone else, will be sweeping this problem under the rug, so that Russia will have time to regroup, to rebuild its military, and go at it again and take another chunk of Ukraine and possibly a chunk of another country. Moldova, it could be part of Poland, it could be a Baltic state, anything is possible.
Yeah, I mean, President Zelensky and Boris Johnson seem to actually be pretty much on the same page, which is why Zelensky was so pleased to see that Boris Johnson had survived that no confidence vote last night, because Zelensky said that Ukraine will fight to recover all of the territory occupied by Russian forces. I mean, is that something that people really think could happen? I mean, that a city like Mariupol, which is technically held by the Russians, but which is really reduced to rubble, is that something that many Ukrainians hold out hope will one day come back to being held by Ukraine again?
I think that is the consensus, that Ukraine will fight to recover all of its territory. But as far as like the immediate goals, we have to be realistic. And I think we've heard it from the Ukrainian president is increasingly that we must at first think about returning to the pre-February 24th borders, the borders right before Russia's latest full-scale incursion. Whether that will include or not Mariupol, it's debatable. Once again, part of the reason why Ukrainians are, fighting so adamantly for Severodonetsk is what President Zelensky said. It is much harder to reconquer, to go on offensive, than to hold it down, to defend it. So it might cost an unreasonable, amount of, blood spilled and treasure expended and weapons used to try to recapture Mariupol. I think military men, our generals, will have to make that decision before politicians do. But once again, the consensus within Ukrainian society remains that we are not going to give any more land to the Russians.
And just lastly, I mean, so there's new weaponry on its way to Ukraine. Some's already arrived. We think that might make a significant difference, and it might arrive just in time to save somewhere like Severodonetsk from falling into Russian hands. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And the second part of my question, which is really quite unrelated, any indications that there could be some talks on the horizon in the not too distant future, talks aimed at perhaps finding some kind of a settlement?
Well, the first part of the question, yes, the Ukrainians are hoping to hold, to hang tight and to keep up their defense of Severodonetsk long enough for the weapons to arrive. Whether that happens or not, I cannot tell you. But, there are other two major cities that Russians will definitely consider going after right after that, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which are pretty well defended at this point. But, once again, it's a matter of how soon the weapons arrive and how soon the Ukrainians are trained to use them, because that's another issue that takes time. The second part of the question, as far as peace talks, we are hearing that Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, is currently in Turkey. He's meeting with Erdogan regarding the food crisis, and we're hearing that they may be discussing restarting peace talks. I think it would not be illogical to expect Russians to restart these talks. They're also seeing how their forces are getting depleted. They're running out of men, ammunition. It's a war of attrition for both sides. And so Russia, I think, will be motivated, this is what we're seeing right now in its offensive, to try to conquer as much territory as they can, to establish a new status quo, and to try to negotiate a peace treaty based on these new conquests. Whether Ukraine will agree to it, we've already discussed. I think it still remains a distant prospect.
Thank you very much. We're out of time. Peter Zalmayev, Director of the Eurasian Democracy Initiative, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.